Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, New Books, New Worlds, Diverse Titles for Youth and Young Adult. I'm Ronnie Curry, Booklist Associate Editor, Books for Youth. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. To resize the slides, look to the magnifying glass icons located to the left of the slides. There, you can increase or decrease the size and select how you'd like the slides to appear. If you lose audio or would like to change the way you're connected to it, look at the bottom of your screen for a circle with 3 dots. Clicking that icon will open a menu with an audio connection option. If you're in the audience, you're in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the right side of your screen is a control panel with an area at the bottom for Q&A. Simply type your question into the field and click Send. Attendees can see questions asked during the webinar as well as the answers provided. Links to today's slides and title list were sent directly to you from WebEx at the start of the webinar. But you can also download them at any time by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive a follow-up email containing links to today's slide presentation, title list, certificate of completion, and video recording. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Melissa Croce, Associate Marketing Manager at Macmillan Children's Publishing Group, June Her, author of Silence of Bones, published by Feiwel & Friends, an imprint of Macmillan Children's Publishing Group, Nicole Duguay, Digital Marketer and Sales Coordinator at Lorimer Children Teens, Emma Raditz, Editorial and Development Associate at Elsewhere Editions, an imprint of Archipelago Books, and Sarah Gale, Associate Editor and Director of Publicity at Elsewhere Editions, an imprint of Archipelago Books. First, we'll hear from Melissa Croce. Melissa is the Associate Marketing Manager for Macmillan Children's School and Library team. She has been with the company for 4 years. Her favorite Macmillan books to read are middle grade, nonfiction, graphic novels, and young adult books. Welcome, Melissa.
Great. Thanks, Ronnie. Okay, so hi everybody. I'm Melissa Croce with Macmillan Children's, and I'm here to share with you some titles we're really excited about featuring characters and creators who identify with a marginalized group. And I will be going in order from books for younger readers to books for teen and young adults. First up, we have We Are Water Protectors by Carol Lindstrom and illustrated by Michaela Good. We come from water, Lindstrom writes. Water is sacred. This stunning Own Voices book is both beautifully drawn and a rallying cry to protect the environment from further destruction. Water Protectors follows one young girl as she learns about the prophecy of what they call the Black Snake, aka the oil pipelines running through their land, and she stands with her people to fight against this evil. With back matter that discusses the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, a short glossary, and a pledge to become a water protector in each reader's community, this is a must-have in every classroom and library. Be Amazing by Desmond is Amazing, illustrated by Dylan Glynn. The name Desmond is Amazing may sound familiar to you, and it's because it is the drag name of Desmond Naples, who is a 12-year-old LGBTQ+ advocate and also the founder of House of Amazing, which is the first drag house for kids. Desmond wanted to create a book that embodied his motto, Be Yourself Always, while acknowledging and paying homage to all of the LGBTQ+ advocates and activists who came before him, including Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, and more. This colorful, joyful book encourages readers to shine brightly and be who they are, because who they are is amazing. I'm Not a Girl by Maddox Lyons and Jessica Verdi, illustrated by Dana Simpson, follows a young trans boy who is dreading picture day at school because the face that looks back at him in the mirror with long hair and feminine clothes doesn't match how he feels inside. However, he doesn't know how to articulate any of what he's feeling. This journey of this young child figuring out who they are also includes a really telling demonstration about how people, both in this child's family and outside of it, enforce the gender binary in ways that can seem harmless on the surface, but nonetheless have negative effects on all children, cis or trans, and how it stifles their self-expression and identity. However, in this book, a happy ending is found here. Some friends help our protagonist discover a word to put how they feel, that word being transgender, and now that they can articulate and put a name to how they finally feel, they can start becoming who they truly are. So when Henry Holt's editorial director, Christian Trimmer, brought this book to acquisitions many months ago, he brought it to the table just as doing a biography on the first gay man to run for president, saying that, no matter what happens in any of the, Democratic primaries, this book would remain timely and relevant. I don't think he knew how timely and relevant this book would become, as Pete has been a lot more successful in the race, more so than many pundits originally expected. But I digress. Mayor Pete by Rob Sanders and Levi Hastings follows Pete Buttigieg before he was known as Mayor Pete. Pete was a boy growing up in a Rust Belt town, a kid who dreamed about being an astronaut, and a high schooler who wondered about a life of public service. Without a doubt, no one could have imagined who Pete would become. Through victories and defeats and the changes that the seasons bring, this young boy from South Bend grew into a man devoted to helping others. A refrain throughout this book is, "Only time would tell, ... As of today, that's still very much applicable to Pete's political and personal journey. Moving on to middle grade, Woke, A Young Poet's Call to Justice, is a collection of poems to inspire kids to stay woke and become a new generation of activists. Historically, poets have been on the forefront of social movements. Woke is a collection of poems by women that reflects the joy and passion in the fight for social justice, tackling topics from discrimination to empathy and acceptance to speaking out. With Theodore Taylor's bright emotional art and writing from Mahogany L. Brown, Elizabeth Acevedo, and Olivia Gatwood, kids will be inspired to create their own art and poems to express how they see justice and injustice. The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez is a magical middle grade debut novel by Adriana Cuevas. All Nestor Lopez wants is to live in one place for more than a few months and have dinner with his dad. When he and his mother move to a new town to live with his grandmother after his dad's latest military deployment, Nestor plans to lay low. He definitely doesn't want anyone to find out his deepest secret, that he can talk to animals. But when animals in his new town start disappearing, Nestor's grandmother becomes the prime suspect after she is spotted in the woods where they were last seen. As Nestor investigates the source of the disappearances, he learns that these animals are being seized by a Tule Vieja, a witch who can absorb an animal's powers by biting them during a solar eclipse. And the next eclipse, of course, is just around the corner. Now it's up to Nestor's extraordinary ability and his new friends to catch the Tule Vieja and save the place that he might just be calling home. Another middle grade debut on our list is The Brave by James Byrd. Colin can't help himself. He has a unique condition that finds him counting every letter spoken to him. It's a quirk that makes him a prime target for bullies and a continual frustration to the adults around him, including his father. When Colin is asked to leave yet another school, his dad decides to send him to live in Minnesota with a mother he's never met. She is Ojibwe and lives on a reservation. Colin arrives on the reservation with his loyal dog, Seven, and quickly finds his mom and his new home to be warm, welcoming, and accepting of his condition. Colin's quirk is further matched by that of his neighbor, Arenda, a girl who mostly lives in her treehouse and believes she is turning into a butterfly. With Arenda's help, Colin works hard to overcome his challenges and start to trust in the new home and family that he's found. Snap, the girl on the cover, her town has a witch. At least that's how the rumor goes. But in reality, Jax the witch is just a Crocs-wearing, internet-savvy old lady who sells roadkill skeletons online after she does a little ritual to put their spirits to rest. It's creepy, sure, but Snap thinks it's kind of cool, too. Snap and Jax make a deal. Jax will teach Snap how to take care of the baby opossums that Snap rescued, and Snap will help Jax with her work. But as Snap starts to get to know Jax, she realizes that Jax may in fact have real magic and a connection with Snap's family's past. Snapdragon by Kat Lee is a weird, delightful book about friendship, deceptive appearances, and how happy endings are always possible, and how endings themselves don't always mean the end. I really enjoyed this book, and it is one of my personal favorites this season. Moving on to YA, we have Now That I Found You by Christina Forrest. You might have heard of Christina Forrest from her super fun debut last spring, I Want to Be Where You Are, which followed an aspiring ballerina. This latest book follows Evie Jones, who is poised to become Hollywood's next big star. She wants to be famous, and as famous as her super famous grandmother, but her dreams are dashed when a friend betrays her and she becomes blacklisted in the community. Fortunately, Evie knows just the thing to save her floundering career, a public appearance with America's most beloved actress, a.k.a. her famous grandmother, Gigi. The only problem, Gigi is a recluse who's been out of the limelight for almost 20 years. Days before Evie plans to present her grandmother with an honorary award in front of Hollywood's elite, Gigi does the unthinkable. She disappears. With time running out and her comeback on the line, Evie reluctantly enlists the help of the last person to see Gigi before she vanished, Milo Williams, who is a cute musician Evie isn't sure she can trust. As Evie and Milo conduct a wild manhunt across New York City, romance and adventure abound while Evie makes some surprising discoveries about her grandmother and herself. Okay, this is a book I'm currently reading and loving. This is Hunted by the Sky by Tanaz Bhathena. You might know Tanaz because she's written some great contemporary novels, and now she's turning her hand to fantasy. This is set in a world inspired by medieval India. We follow two characters, Gul and Kavas. Gul has spent her entire life running because of the star-shaped birthmark on her arm that happens to be the subject of a prophecy that would put her as a killer at the hands of the king. The king, Lohar, has thus been taking every girl who has such a birthmark and they disappear. Because of this mark, her parents were murdered at the hands of King Lohar and forced her into hiding to protect her own life. So when a group of rebel women called the Sisters of the Golden Lotus rescue her and take her in and train her in warrior magic, Gul wants only one thing: revenge. Kavas, on the other hand, is a young man who lives in tenements meant for non-magical people, and he's just about ready to sign his life over to the king's army. His father is terminally ill, and Kavas will do anything to save him. However, sparks fly when he meets a mysterious girl, Gul, in the capital's bazaar, and as the chemistry between them undeniably grows, he becomes entangled in a mission of vengeance and discovers a magic he never expected to find. Next up is Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. When his traditional Latinx family has problems accepting his true gender, Yadriel becomes determined to prove himself a real brujo. To do so, he must complete a ritual in which he asks for the blessing of the goddess of death, and then he summons and frees a spirit of a recently deceased person. With the help of his cousin and Bessa Maritza, he performs the ritual himself and sets out to find the ghost of his murdered cousin and set it free. However, the ghost he summons is actually Julian Diaz, the school's resident bad boy, and Julian is not about to go quietly into death. He's determined to find out how he died, because he has no clue, and tie up some loose ends before he leaves to go to the afterlife. Left with no choice, Yadriel agrees to help Julian so they both can get what they want. But the longer Yadriel spends with Julian, the less he wants him to leave. This was a super fun book. I just finished reading it, and how Julian and Yadriel, if and how they end up together, is a super, super fun twist. Jean Lewin Yang is back with Dragon Hoops, turning the spotlight on his life, his family, and the high school where he teaches. Jean understands stories, like comic book stories, big action, bigger thrills, and the hero always wins. But Jean doesn't get sports at all, and that's all anybody can talk about at the high school where he teaches. The Dragons are having a phenomenal season that's decades in the making, and each victory brings them closer to their goal, the state championships. Once Jean gets to know these young all-stars, he realizes that their story is just as thrilling as anything he's seen on a comic book page, and he knows he has to follow this epic to its end. In All Boys Aren't Blue, a memoir manifesto, in a series of personal essays, prominent journalist and LGBTQ+ activist George M. Johnson explores his childhood, adolescence, and college years in New Jersey and Virginia. From the memories of getting his teeth kicked out by bullies at age 5, to flea marketing with his loving grandmother, to his first sexual relationship, this young adult memoir weaves together the trials and triumphs faced by Black queer boys, both a primer for teens eager to be allies as well as a reassuring testimony for young queer men of color. All Boys Aren't Blue covers topics such as gender identity, toxic masculinity, brotherhood, family, structural marginalization, consent, and finally, Black joy. And lastly, I have for you I Kissed Alice by Anna Birch and illustrations by Victoria Ying. Rhodes and Ileana couldn't be more different, but that's not why they hate each other. Rhodes, a hyper-gifted artist, has always excelled at Alabama's Conservatory of the Arts, until she has a bout of creator's block anyway, while Ileana, a transfer student, tries to outshine everyone with her intense competitive work ethic. Since only one of them can get the coveted capstone scholarship, the competition between them is fierce. They both escape the pressure on a fanfic site where they are unknowingly collaborating on an Alice in Wonderland-inspired webcomic. And despite being worst enemies in real life, their anonymous online identities, I Kissed Alice and Curious in Cheshire, are starting to like each other a lot. When the truth comes out, will they destroy each other's future? This is great for fans of Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda and Fangirl. This romantic comedy about enemies to lovers is exactly what you want. That is everything for me. Here's my contact info if you have any more questions. Most, if not all, of the middle grade and young adult titles are up on NetGalley, so feel free to request an advanced copy through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And now we have the pleasure of hearing from June Her, author of The Silence of Bones. June was born in South Korea and raised in Canada, except for the time when she moved back to Korea and attended high school there. She studied history and literature at the University of Toronto. She began writing her debut novel, The Silence of Bones, after obsessing over books about Joseon, Korea. When she's not writing, she works as an assistant for the public library or can be found journaling at a coffee shop. June currently lives in Toronto with her husband and daughter. And after her presentation, June is going to field a short Q&A with Melissa, who we just heard from. And now, June, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So The Silence of Bones is set in medieval Korea, and it's about an indentured servant named Sol who must assist a young inspector in solving the case of a murdered noblewoman. So while I was writing this book, one of the things that was most challenging but also most rewarding for me was the research, and so I wanted to go a bit into the background of that. So if you told me 8 or 9 years ago that I'd be writing a Korean historical, I wouldn't have believed it. For most of my life, I just had no interest in Korean history. I am Korean, and my parents are very traditionally Korean, but I spent most of my life in Canada, and I didn't think Korean history was relevant to me. Then I began reading about Korea out of curiosity, and that's when I ended up being so surprised to find that so much of who I am is rooted in Korea's past. The more I learned about the past, the more I learned about myself, and I realized that I'm not as disconnected from Korea as I imagined myself to be. So it's this personal connection I felt with Korean history that really kept me going even when I wanted to give up, because researching has been the greatest challenge. There's so much information out there about, for example, British history. I used to write British historicals. I could easily go online on an online forum and find answers to the most obscure questions, like about bonnets or the cloth of gloves, those kind of niche things. But when it comes to Korean history, especially before Korea was colonized by Japan, the resources become harder and harder to find. And by that, I mean there's an abundance of research written in Korean, but not as many translated in the English language. So I remember once when I began reaching out to professors or students who had mastered in Korean history, I asked them about 1800s, and even they had trouble finding answers for me because it's just very difficult to access here in the West. So yes, a lot of the niche historical details aren't translated, so that's why it's so difficult. So to be historically accurate as a Korean diaspora writer, I had to spend hours and hours translating articles, and I often felt really scared that I was being historically inaccurate, but I'd never be too sure if I was making a mistake, so I'd spend even more time fact-checking. And to make things trickier, Korean scholarly articles about Korean history often uses Hanja, and that means classical Chinese characters, because in the Chosun, the Korean language, the written word, was actually created in, I believe, the 13 or 1400s. So before then, Chinese characters were used as the official government script. So on top of trying to understand the Korean, I was also spending more hours trying to understand a Chinese word. So it would often take me 1 to 2 hours to figure out what even just one word meant. But learning about Korea's past was so fascinating, so I don't regret the effort. One piece of Korean history that really inspired The Silence of Bones was the Confucian-based moralistic Newapa, and that's a law that prohibited free contact between men and women. So this law resulted in intense gender segregation. For example, women from all classes were forced to hide their faces with an outer garment whenever they left the house. Even the living quarter for women was separated from the men's by a gate, and men weren't permitted to even enter it except for close male relatives. But even then, close male relatives weren't allowed to even stay overnight. So while researching about gender segregation, I found this fascinating group of women called Tamo. They were servants who worked for the police bureau, and they were in charge of female victims, culprits, and corpses. Tamos were apparently the first female police force to ever have actual arresting power in all of world history. But this Tamo position wasn't formed because of any feminist reasons. The reason for Tamo's existence was rooted in gender segregation. Tamos were needed in the police bureau because of the strict Confucian rule, which I mentioned earlier, that forbid men and women from contacting each other. So basically, male officers had limited access with women in general, which made investigating nearly impossible for them. That's why they needed Tamos. The Tamos, as they were women, were able to take charge of the areas male officers were restricted from. They were also the housekeepers of the police bureau, in charge of serving tea and carrying out other little chores. And that's what really fascinated me about the Tamos. So the main thing was actually that they were former palace nurses. The palace nurses who had failed their medical exam and who had been demoted to the Tamo position as punishment. So these women were highly educated, and they knew how to read and write, and they understood medicine and science. So while the reason for the Tamo's existence was deeply patriarchal, at the same time, women were able to subvert it and prove how capable they were. I was so intrigued by the concept of the Tamo that I ended up making the heroine of The Silence of Bones a 16-year-old Tamo. And that is the research behind the scenes. Oops.
All right, I am back. Thanks, June. I just have a couple questions for you for the remainder of our time together. So you said that you researched Korean history originally out of curiosity. At that time, did you know that you wanted to write a book, or did the research alone inspire you to write The Silence of Bones?
So when I first began reading, it was just because I knew so little about Korean history, and so I wanted to get a better idea of what I was missing out on. And when I actually started becoming obsessed with Korean history, there was that itch in me to write about Joseon Korea. So that was like the early 1800s. But then for me, the immediate emotion I felt was terror. I felt like I didn't have the right to write about Korea because I'm a diasporan Korean. I only spent like a small portion of my life in Korea. My Korean reading and writing ability is probably a bit lower than a kindergarten student in Korea. And so I felt like I had no right to write about a Korean historical period. But then, and I guess the biggest burden for me was that there's just so few books written about Joseon Korea in the West. And so I felt like there was that burden of representation. Like, am I writing this correctly? Am I am I even capable of researching about Korea when the resources are so difficult to access? But I just really, really wanted a book set in Chosun Korea. And so I think what really gave me the courage was the We Need Diverse Books movement. And I think I realized I should just write the book that I would have wanted when I was a teen. So yeah, that's
Great.
the story.
I love it. More and more of Western society is becoming familiar with Korean culture, primarily, modern culture through K-dramas and K-pop, and like through movies with like Parasite. Which aspects of Korean culture do you hope permeate Western culture in the future?
So I'm a bit biased because I am a history buff. For me, like growing up, you see like things like Jane Austen permeating like the Victorian era, and everyone knows it. So many people love it. I myself was totally obsessed with it. I was a total Jane Austen junkie. She's the reason why I became a writer. So for me, it would be Korea's history. I'd love for more and more people to know the broader and complex side of Korean history, and to be more, and for Korea's history to be so permeated within Western culture that Korean Americans and Korean Canadians they don't feel like Korean history is irrelevant. Because I remember growing up, I'd read or watch things about Korean history, and I'd just be like, ew, that has nothing to do with me. Like, I'll never need to, write an essay about Korea at school, or I never needed it to thrive in the West, I felt like. I just felt like, I guess it was like me growing up thinking, Korea is exotic, like the history is exotic, like I want nothing to do with it. But I realized that's because I grew up with so few representation of just Korean history in general. What I did grow up with was Korean history represented as, Korea colonized, or Korea, the struggling immigrant. And I think those stories are very necessary, like about the struggle. But because the focus was so much on the struggle, that's all I knew. And I think as a youth, I didn't want to associate myself with all that tragedy and heartache. And I just felt like it was a bit too close to home for me, because it's not too long ago that Korea was colonized, and I still I still have a grandma who's still like, oh, Japanese, blah, blah, blah. Like, I love Japanese people, but she still has that trauma, and there's still the generation remaining that carries on with the trauma of what happened, and that's basically all I grew up knowing about. And so I think when I understood Korean history as just the struggle, it was just like, it was a bit uncomfortable for me, because sometimes the reason why I read books is sometimes just to escape from the pain sometimes that we experience in reality. And I grew up with, like I said, British historical fiction, Jane Austen, and I loved how those books just helped me escape, and just helped me immerse myself in a different world. And so what I'd really like is not just for, colonized Korea to be the focus of the history that people in the West know about, but just all aspects of it. And I feel like Korean drama has really gone ahead and laid out the groundwork for that. But yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. I really hope that we get to see more of that too, and I hope maybe that you can be the one to write some Jane Austen Korean inspired fusion. That'd be so fun. I believe that our time is up, but thank you so much again, and I really enjoyed our Q&A and hearing you talk more about The Silence in Bones and Death.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, and thanks so much, June. Our next presenter will be Nicole Duguay. Nicole is the digital marketer and sales coordinator for Lorimer Children Teen. As a queer woman herself, Nicole is an advocate for LGBTQ+ voices and diverse representation in media. She was featured in the short documentary Bury Your Tropes about the representation of queer people on screen. After spending some time in the world of scientific publishing, Nicole is now focused on getting books into the hands of people who want to see their own lives reflected off the page. She can usually be found on Twitter discussing the latest depictions of LGBTQ+ characters on TV. Nicole lives in Toronto with her fiancé and their very small dog. Welcome, Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole with Lorimer. Thanks so much for having us, Booklist. I'm just going to dive right in here. Lorimer has been publishing fiction and nonfiction since 1975. Our Children and Teens imprint specifically focuses on diverse books for middle grade and young adult. The majority of our books are high-low to engage reluctant readers, some in series and some standalone. We're very proud to have many own voices authors writing about their experiences from a first-hand point of view. When we talk about diversity, first of all, we mean characters. The characters in Lorimer titles come from a wide variety of cultural backgrounds and ethnicities. Our protagonists and their friends have different physical and mental abilities. They represent a spectrum of gender identities, not just cisgender boys and girls, and they come from different socioeconomic situations and family circumstances, even within the same book. When we talk about diversity, we also mean authors. Whenever we can, Lorimer publishes authors who write using their own voices. They write characters who are true to their own lived experiences, which gives our readers an authentic view of the story at hand instead of being disappointed by yet another stereotype. Now to get into our books. First up, we have two standalone graphic novels with similar themes, so I've grouped them together here. The first is The Courage of Elfina by Andre Jacob, illustrated by Christine Delazen. It is about a 12-year-old girl from Paraguay who is offered a place in her aunt's home to attend a better school. Her aunt's family abruptly takes Elfina out of Paraguay altogether and moves to Montreal, where Elfina is not enrolled in school and is instead put to work as the household servant. The story chronicles her struggle to work up the courage to tell somebody about her situation and get back home to her real family. If I Go Missing by Brianna Johnny with Nahani Shingus, illustrated by Neil Shanacampo, was originally a letter written by then 14-year-old Brianna to her city's chief of police about the ongoing epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. In her letter, Brianna calls out the authorities for neglecting to immediately investigate missing Indigenous people and urges them not to treat me as the Indigenous person I am proud to be if she were reported missing. On a bit of a lighter topic, Real Love is a new collection of high-low YA novels that focus on realistic teen relationships. The novels feature diverse teen characters in contemporary settings. They experience love, romance, dating, sex, body image, more. These contemporary YA romances are from authors who write from real-world LGBTQ+ experience. These two sets of companion novels are told from each character's perspective. Charming and Cinders by Met Bach take a modern lesbian twist on the story of Cinderella. Ash is living with her stepfamily. While saving to get into a coding program, she develops an app to deal with online bullying. And Shar is an aspiring musician who turns to the app for support. Just Julian and Romeo for Real by Marcus Harwood Jones comprise a gay retelling of Romeo and Juliet. When Romeo's homophobic friends can't accept him as gay, he must prove that his love for Julian is real. Side Streets are edgy, fast-paced novels that combine real-world themes and believable characters to make for short, heart-stopping books. First up, we have Cold Grab by Stephen Barwin. After moving to Toronto from the Philippines, Angelo is angry with all the changes in his life. After being accused of stealing, he has to set things right without getting the law involved. In On the Run by Marilyn N. Hallman, 17-year-old Ryan has been in and out of juvie for the past 4 years. With nowhere to go and scared that he'll be picked up by police for a crime he witnessed, Ryan decides to breach his probation and flee to find a former foster family. Last is Push Back by Karen Spafford Fitz. Angry with his family, Zane trashes a shed and ends up in trouble with the police. In order to avoid a criminal record, he goes into a restorative justice program, but must avoid a gang that wants to recruit him. Real justice stories are short narrative biographies of young people who fell afoul of the justice system and were wrongfully convicted of murder. Throughout their ordeals, they maintained their innocence and fought back, eventually proving they were not guilty. In Branded a Baby Killer by Jasmine DaCosta, a teen mom is wrongfully convicted of the murder of her 2-year-old son, thanks to false testimony by a famous doctor. The book tells how an innocent mother's life was nearly destroyed by an unethical and incompetent doctor and how she fought for and finally received some justice. Then we have Convicted for Being Micmac by Bill Swan. When a black teen was murdered in a park late one night, his young companion, Donald Marshall Jr., became a prime suspect. Police coached 2 teens to testify against Donald, which helped convict him of a murder he did not commit. Then we have 14 and Sentenced to Death, also by Bill Swan. In the 1950s, Steve Truscott was a typical 14-year-old. One summer evening, his 12-year-old classmate Lynn Harper asked for a lift to the nearby highway on his bike, and Steve agreed, making him the last known person to see Lynn alive. When he was arrested and then convicted of killing Lynn Harper, the penalty at the time was death by hanging. Then we have Jailed for Life for Being Black by Cynthia J. Farian. Reuben Carter, a professional winning boxer, was very vocal about racism in the local New Jersey police force. In 1966, local policemen arrested Reuben and a friend for a triple murder. The 2 were convicted and sent to jail for life. Then we have our Sports Stories series. These are action-driven sports novels that turn reluctant readers into all-star readers. They feature characters with diverse racial, physical, mental, and economic backgrounds playing a wide variety of sports. In Run and Gun by Eric Howling, 14-year-old Griffin uses basketball to find a balance between his school teammates and his friends from a disadvantaged part of town, bringing together opposing ideas of how basketball should be played. In The Playmaker by Alex O'Brien, Zoe deals with envy, prejudice, and her own problems with self-esteem after making a place on a new hockey team, including overcoming shyness to raise funding to cover her hockey fees. Next is Taking the Lead by Karen Spafford Fitz. After being kicked off his school track and field team for an angry outburst, Jonas's principal makes a deal with him. If Jonas wants to compete at the final track meet, he must train Darian, a vision and mobilely impaired teen, for a 5K race. Then we have Dressed to Play by Jennifer Manuel. Jordan is a star basketball player on her school team and aspires to play women's college or pro basketball like her heroes. But first, she has to deal with the expectations of teammates, boys, and parents on whether being an athlete somehow makes her less of a girl. Up next, we have 2 different series with books printed in dyslexia-friendly fonts with fun typography and artwork. The different books in each series deal with different topics that kids will encounter in their everyday lives, and we're really proud that these will resonate with kids with issues like ADHD or anxiety, who don't usually see characters their own age dealing with the same types of things. But first, I'll give you a quick overview of what makes a book dyslexia-friendly. They're printed in a font created to help with some symptoms of dyslexia, like confusion caused by flipping and swapping letters while reading. Wide margins and spacing between lines and paragraphs are used to help break up the text. No hyphenation is used for words that aren't usually split, and even the physical attributes of the books themselves have been taken into consideration. Heavy matte paper reduces glare and prevents show-through from the other side of the page. Our first dyslexia-friendly series is called The Secret Games of Maximus Todd by L.M. Nicodemo. Max Todd is a young kid with ADHD, though that's not necessarily specified in the books. The various titles in this series take readers through common scenarios kids will be familiar with, like going to the doctor and playing soccer, where Max needs to overcome his wiggles and jitters and super fidgets to focus on the task at hand. Our second dyslexia-friendly series is called Be Brave, Morgan, and they're all by Ted Staunton, illustrated by Bill Slavin. Morgan is a young kid with anxiety, and again, not necessarily mentioned in the text itself. The series presents readers with situations where Morgan has to overcome his fears, like riding new rides at the fall fair or standing up to bullies teasing a classmate. This shows kids that although something may be unknown, they can be brave enough to face it, just like Morgan. So that's a pretty good look at what we've got going on for kids' titles that reflect today's topic of diverse books for youth and young adult. I also want to let you all know that Lorimer provides free teaching guides that can be used with any book in some of our series for independent and classroom activities, and those can be downloaded at lorimer.ca/teachers. Our books are available from all major retailers or your preferred wholesaler, or direct from our distributor Learner at learnerbooks.com. You can keep an eye out for us on social media at Lorimer Kids, or if you're interested in our adult titles, you can find our tweets and posts as at Lorimer Books. Thanks. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Our final presenters today will be Emma Raditz and Sarah Gale. Emma is the Editorial and Development Associate at Elsewhere Editions and Archipelago Books. She has worked on books by authors from Denmark, Rwanda, Greece, Italy, Korea, and several other countries. She, like Archipelago, is committed to bringing out groundbreaking works of international fiction, as well as visionary children's books from around the world. Sarah is Archipelago and Elsewhere's publicist and associate editor. She grew up in Portland, Maine, and is a graduate of Barnard College. Her interest in international adult and children's literature has been enriched by her time at Archipelago and continues to grow. Welcome to Emma and Sarah.
Hello, my name is Emma, and I'm delighted that there are so many people here today. I'm here with my colleague Sarah to tell you about our children's imprint, Elsewhere Editions. Founded 4 years ago, Elsewhere is devoted to translating imaginative works of children's literature from all corners of the world. Our hope is that these titles will enrich children's imaginations and cultivate curiosity about other cultures, as well as delight book lovers, parents, librarians of all ages. We're building a list that shows faith in children as enthusiastic, sensitive, and serious readers. We have about 10 books in print right now, and Sarah and I will be sharing 4 picture books with you today. So first off, I'm really excited to share Charcoal Boys. This is our 3rd book with Brazilian author and illustrator Roger Melo, following the success of his Feather and his Batchelder honor-winning You Can't Be Too Careful. We published this book back in October, and we took Roger on a 3-city tour with events at ILA, USBBY, the Chicago Public Library, and the Evanston Public Library. We also have a couple books with Roger in the pipeline, so we're excited to plan other events and other tours with him. Charcoal Boys, which was just named a couple weeks ago on USBBY's 2020 Outstanding International Books list, tells the story of a boy working in Brazil's coal mines, all from the perspective of a sharp and playful wasp who follows him throughout his day. While watching the boy, the wasp is also desperately searching for a caterpillar to feed his own egg. Charcoal Boys earned a starred review in Booklist, with Michael Cart saying that Roger's work is, quote, filled with haunting enigmas. The fascinating mix of words and images invites, almost demands, rereading to tease out meaning. His review also got at the very tactile and dramatic qualities of the book. What can't be quite captured in these few slides are the vibrant, glowing pinks and oranges flaring throughout the book, signaling the very dangerous fire that surrounds our protagonist. They're also paired with these lovely kind of cool bands of smoke that wrap around the text. And we have a set of die-cut neon flames at the very center of the book that young readers can fan out and watch grow before their eyes. When Roger Melo won the Hans Christian Andersen Award in 2014, he said, and this is a kind of rough translation from the Portuguese, that, quote, children's books should incorporate pain. The world of children is not so private or separate from the adult world. Pain does not respect age groups. So when Roger writes of a young boy working in a coal mine, he's aware of this pain, but he cares most about sharing the ways in which the boy perseveres. The loving friendship he strikes up with Albie, the boy pictured here, or the tenderness between the wasp and the boy. Charcoal Boys is incredibly humorous and humane, playful and surreal, about the capacities of children to live through difficult circumstances. Even though it may seem that this topic is simply too difficult for children, we're guided by this tiny being, the wasp, who's also confused but manages to ask empathetic questions and to lovingly watch the boy. So ultimately, we see the way that one entirely different creature can care for another from afar. I think serious conversations about who should work, who shouldn't, or about environmental issues and why the hornet can't find his egg may arise from each reading. But I also had really lighthearted conversations with children about how Roger made the book. And he collaged the entire book with wire, tissue paper, rocks, and images of rocks. And then he always makes mock-ups of his books that he genuinely travels the world with, editing them and changing the form as he goes. So I could see 7 to 12-year-olds taking things from the natural world, pressing small plants, or taking rocks and shells and creating their own collage-style books inspired by charcoal boys. So next we have I Wish, and this is a collection of poems and portraits by the Dutch poet Jun Her, just nominated for the Hans Christian Andersen, and the Flemish illustrator Ingrid Godon, and it comes out on March 31st. One of Jun's poems appears opposite each transfixing face, expressing the child's deepest wish, desire, or fear. Their confessions range from things like, I wish I never had to blush, to I wish I'd go to school and find that a miracle had happened. The children here wish for more courage, an extremely unusual pet, or to simply be alone for one moment. The poems are introspective. Kirkus recently called the book a probing psychological journey, but they're not without moments of great goofiness and humor and play. Like one character, Carl, who finds happiness. In his mind, it takes the shape of a precious rock. He takes it home with him and he buffs it up so that it shines. I Wish is also very much an art book, about 80 pages of laid vellum paper and full color portraits throughout. It's the kind of lasting and deeply poetic children's book that can be read and reread, that spans reading levels and age groups of about 6 to 16-year-olds. Ingrid's original portraits are going up at New York C.G. Berner Gallery this April, and she's hosting a workshop for teens at the Society of Illustrators. We'd also love to bring her to DC and maybe to Philly, so we'd be excited to talk to any of you about possibilities there. We ultimately hope this book excites young readers to write, to create self-portraits, and to consider asking those questions that are hardest to ask, like what's worth fighting for, how to trust oneself, or how to love oneself. I also think that any of these questions, which I pulled directly from the book, could prompt a self-portrait activity in the classroom, asking students to draw themselves and maybe pair their portraits with a short poem or a journal entry or something like that. Ingrid's serene portraits are brought to life by Jun's earnest and unusual poems. They lift and animate each face from the page, and we hope that young readers can experience this same kind of animation, turning their images into words and giving them life. Please do let me know of any questions, and I'll try to answer them in the chat right now. And yeah, I'll pass it over to Sarah. Thank you so much.
Hi there, I'm Sarah. I'm also from Elsewhere Editions. I'm very happy to talk to you guys about these books. So next up is Philippe Fix's 1968 classic, Seraphine, which is best suited for kids aged between 5 and 10. Seraphine is named for its central character, a ticket puncher in the Paris metro, who is preoccupied by the question of how best to spend his time. He is a creative and buoyant guy, and he soon recognizes that the crowds at rush hour are filled with serious and unhappy-looking people. To Seraphine, even the subway cars and the station seem a bit sad. So to fix this problem, Seraphine decides to decorate his ticket booth with flowers in an attempt to bring some sunshine into the metro station. Seraphine's boss, the perpetually grumpy station master, sees these decorations as an interruption to the status quo and threatens to punish him. Seraphine rallies himself by hanging out with his best friend Plume and searching the Parisian flea markets for treasure. Daydreams, a stray butterfly, and Plume's company are the main pleasures of Seraphine's life until one day Seraphine is summoned by a lawyer and told he's inherited an old ruined mansion. The rest of Seraphine's story is a frolicking romp of invention, restoration, and adventure. Fix writes, every time Plume visited his friend, he had the feeling he was entering a barn, an immense barn full of mysterious corners, unsuspected hideaways, and endless surprises. He felt relaxed there, and you had an urge to sing. The same can be said for this book, which tracks the deadening effects of bureaucracy and industry, even as it celebrates Seraphin's eclectic and gentle resistance. Philippe Fix was a winner of the Hans Christian Andersen Award. He's famous partially for his creation of the comic book character Choo Choo, which was very popular in France in the 60s. Fix studied art and had a particular interest in wood engraving and surrealism. The influence of both styles can be felt in this book, which has these elaborate illustrations of huge trumpeting machines and long, low subway platforms, as you can see here. It's also a great book to pair with an art project. There is a section of the story where Seraphin spends 2 days and 2 nights building a large mechanical musical instrument using many different pieces he finds at a scrap metal seller's yard. So one way to go would be to pair the reading of the book with an activity where kids are encouraged to design their own musical machine and to describe what kinds of sounds or songs would come out of it. Next up is My Valley by Claude Ponty. It's also ideal for a 5 to 10 year old age group. It begins with our narrator named Poochie Blue, introducing us to his large family of twins, which are animals that look a bit like teeny bears or muskrats. Born in the blue cliffs overlooking a startlingly lush valley, Poochie Blue's family members have goofy names, including Boomba Moomba, Empty Dumpty, and Nothin' Doin', and they live inside a large tree. This is the treehouse of every kid's dreams. There's a small library, a big library, a swimming pool, a trapeze room, a cozy bed to read in, and a star room with a telescope in the highest part of the trunk, all shown to us in an intricate labeled diagram. This section of the book would also pair really well with an activity. Maybe kids could draw their own dream rooms and then together add these rooms to a house tree, like the one in My Valley, for everyone to see and discuss. The book is made up of short chapters with large mystical drawings. Claude Ponty tells of traditions, secrets, unexpected deliveries from the sky, and a very sad giant who wishes he could come inside the twins' tree. The twins have created a humane and loving community in a wild natural world. When they see that the giant is sad, instead of shooing him away, they show him all of their customs and include him in their activities. Ponty creates fantastical visions of islands and gardens and dreamy weather, but he also describes the problems that children will immediately relate to and appreciate. One character struggles to control an unwieldy temper, and another has a hard time falling asleep. Ponty, who worked as a newspaper cartoonist for many years, only began his work as a children's book author when his daughter Adele was born in 1985. From the beginning, Ponty wrote his books for his daughter, which feels especially true in My Valley. He's renowned in France and has won many awards for his work, including the 2006 Prix Sorcière Special for his lifetime achievement. He writes with ease of the joys of childhood. Poochie Blue says simply, "I like to watch TV, but I like putting on shows even more. I also like to race on the frozen river, especially when I'm out in front of everyone else and can't see them anymore because they're so far away." My Valley is a story that does not talk down to its young readers, but instead encourages them to think imaginatively about their own worlds. I think this is true about all of our titles at Elsewhere Editions. Our books present the world as a complex and exciting place filled with challenges and possibilities. Our Elsewhere Editions list is currently made up of 10 titles, translated from French, Portuguese, Norwegian, Chinese, Finnish, and Dutch. Because there aren't many other publishers working with international picture books, there's a really large pool of amazing children's literature from around the world that's available for us to translate to English for the first time. We have educational guides for all the books that we presented on today. So if you'd like to see them, please just let me and Emma know, and we will send them along. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks, Emma. And another big thank you to all of today's wonderful panelists. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, title list, certificate of completion, and video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit www.booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones. If you haven't already, be sure to check out the Booklist Reader, where Booklist contributors post weekly about all things books and library land. Have you read the latest issue of Booklinks, a literature and STEM-based resource for educators and school librarians? This super supplement to Booklist comes free with January, April, September, and November issues, and is filled with classroom connections, author and illustrator interviews, and more. For educational content year-round, subscribe to Quick Tips, our free monthly newsletter, at booklistonline.com/newsletters. Booklist has a digital edition of the magazine, which you can connect to your subscription online. This format pairs the page-by-page reading experience of print with the convenience of online access, and it's included free with all Booklist subscriptions. Not yet a subscriber? Take advantage of this special webinar offer to get print, online, digital, and archive access to Booklist for only $99. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and one more thank you to all of our sponsors, Macmillan Children's Publishing Group, Lorimer Children Teens, and Elsewhere Editions, an imprint of Archipelago Books. This concludes today's webinar.